Okay, so now that we're down the rabbit hole of environmentalism, or as I call it, environmentalism, and we're in the realm of this idea that man is always bad for nature, nature is always bad for man, I figured maybe we should go after climate change now. And climate change is such a huge subject. There's so many avenues to go down, so many people saying so many different predictions, and it's never ending. I mean, I don't really know where to start. Exactly. I mean, we've got Al Gore with his bullshit predictions and making a second movie, and even when he made the first movie, critics were saying, well, hey, you don't have the science quite right here, you don't have the science quite right here, but they were still allowed to sell it to us. They were still allowed to show it, and, you know, it just goes to show you that any idiot can go out there and say that man is bad for the environment because of X, and it gets published as fact. I mean, if you want another fine example of this, I've got a friend who, he's going to college up in the UW, and he has an English teacher who makes him write about all sorts of leftist garbage, and one day she chose to make him write about CO2 and how CO2 was destroying the ozone layer. Not the climate, the ozone layer. This English teacher is trying to make him write a scientific paper, and she doesn't even know what the hell she's talking about. She's got two theories crisscrossed, as if they're the same thing. So this is who we have educating our people at the higher education. Burned out old hippies that have basically aren't connected with reality, and they have two things mixed together into one. He tried to tell her this and tried to correct her on it, and she basically just argued with him for a while, and eventually it's, you know, do what teachers say or you get a failing grade. You know, that's kind of where this goes. And this is the problem with climate change, just as it was the problem with the ozone layer. You're not allowed to disagree, you're not allowed to think about what they're saying or use other scientific facts that you know are true to disprove them, because the agenda is man is bad for the climate, man is bad for Earth, man is bad. You know, anything that nature does is okay, but man is bad. Man is not part of nature, apparently. So, I guess the first place we should visit, well, I guess technically we've already visited a first place here, but the next area we should visit in this whole climate change thing is, what do skeptics actually believe? And the left thinks that skeptics believe that climate change doesn't exist. Well, that's the problem. See, skeptics never said that climate change doesn't exist. Obviously, climate change exists. Obviously, the climate can change. I mean, you look at the deserts, they've got evidence that the seafloor, that some of the deserts, you know, used to be oceans or lakes, and now obviously they're deserts. You know, they find seashells in the desert. So they know that there was a difference in climate there. And obviously the Ice Age is a bigger example of climate change. The Ice Age going away, you know, going into an ice age and then coming out of one, is an example of extreme climate change. Now, man wasn't the cause of the Ice Age ending. Obviously, we didn't have a bunch of industry everywhere. So, why, in that example, is climate change normal? But in this example, you know, what's going on today, why is climate change not normal today? Why is it that the Earth warming up half a degree or a full degree in 100 years, why is that considered too extreme? I mean, the Earth was covered in ice, and then there were warming periods in which the Earth had no ice, virtually no ice on it whatsoever. Those are two extreme opposites. And this all happened in our, you know, millions of years ago. It's prehistory. It's prehistoric. Why in the heck can't you argue that the climate change occurring now isn't natural? I mean, that's the thing. That's where there's a difference here between what liberals think, conservatives or skeptics think, and what the skeptics actually think. Skeptics are actually trying to study why the climate is changing, and they're putting it on things like the elliptical orbit of the Earth, the tilt axis of the Earth, because it changes. Both of those do. And the output from the sun. The sun actually has solar cycles in which it has more active sun flares and less active sun flares. The sun basically puts out different amounts of UV radiation. And this can be proven by looking at the ice ages. It can also be proven by looking at other planets in the solar system. Mars is experiencing global warming. Where did I get that from? NASA. The ice caps on Mars have been melting. So it stands to reason that there's climate change happening there, and we're not present on that planet. Why is it happening there? And why is it that if it's happening there, it can't happen on Earth? See, these are the questions, the logical questions that I can put forth into my argument, and the left can't answer it. All they can do is badger on about how I'm wrong and how climate change is still happening and I don't understand what I'm talking about. But I'm sitting here giving you a logical argument. You know what happened the last time I tried to argue this with somebody who was extremely hippie, extreme leftist? He tried to tell me that my sources of information were wrong and paid off. That was his argument. You know, I did the best that I could to source an argument for him. I went to NOAA and I, you know, showed him some. Actually, I didn't go to NOAA, but I went to I can't remember what it was called, but it was an ocean, some sort of oceanic. What was it? Oceanic Association of Denmark or something. It was something to do with Denmark, and they had records of showing the ice caps down there at the Arctic weren't really changing. They were pretty much the same. You know, there's a melt-off in the summer seasons, and then in the winter seasons it comes back, and they were showing that there were some years where it was a little bit more, and some years where it was a little bit less. I mean, for every extreme that was happening at the Arctic, there was an equal and opposite extreme later on in the year. And their records were showing this all the way back as far as 1954. If I remember right, that's when the record starts. So why... Of course, the liberals, you know, they can't argue with this. So what do? They attack my sources and say they're paid off. Well, why is it that your sources can't be paid off then? Why is it that there can't be a government agenda to control you? Why is that crazy? I mean, the government's done it plenty of other places. Why now are they all of a sudden sincere? Why now is the state holy power and they can never lie? When in the past they've lied all the time. So, you know, this is the beginning of my climate change series. I have a feeling we're going to do a series of videos because there's just so many facts to go on about, and we really don't have that much time to do it. So, yeah, I'm at one of my delivery spots, and I will be right back. Many joys of being a delivery driver. Can you tell? This is what this climate change agenda is doing to us. It's making us drive these tiny little crappy cars, and I've got a big delivery I've got to deliver to the shop. Look at this. This is ridiculous. I can't even shift correctly. I can only go to first and third because this box is in the way. Anyway, so I was talking about climate change, and there's so many avenues to go down. I mean, we can go after Al Gore and the false claims he made. That would take us all day. That'd be a very long video. Now he's got another movie coming out, another inconvenient lie that's going to be shared with us. But I feel like we should go after a little bit of the science, just like we did with the ozone layer. And much like the ozone layer, CO2 is what they're demonizing here this time around. And CO2, just like Freon, weighs more than oxygen. So again, you have this gas being demonized and classified as a pollutant that weighs more than oxygen. So it's going to sink. It's not going to stay up in the atmosphere for long. You know, once it's a little bit heavier than oxygen, so obviously it's going to float a little bit, especially if it's heated up. But once it cools down, it falls. And that makes sense because plants, they need CO2. Without CO2, you can't have plants. So naturally, the gas falling down towards the surface makes a lot of sense. The plants need the gas, and you know, the two are intertwined with each other here. So to classify CO2 as a pollutant was probably one of the biggest mistakes these people made. So the other problem with that is that you exhale CO2 all the time. So that was really one of the biggest mistakes they made. They're going after a gas for which life cannot exist without. And they're trying to argue, well, there's an excess of it, there's too much. That's not true. If you look back in the past, there have been great cooling periods in the planet's history where CO2 levels were twice as much where they're at now. There's also been periods where CO2 was higher than it is now and the planet's been warmer. But obviously the argument can be made that there is no correlation between CO2 and temperature, because there have been periods where the planet had more CO2 than it did now, and it still was colder than it is now. The more manageable load, as you can see. So, yeah, when you start going after the science of these things, you really do realize that the left doesn't have a very good argument at all. Once again, they overlook some very simple things that they didn't really teach us in school. You know, all they're teaching kids is that industrial factories and cars are destroying the planet, and that's the end of it, you know. They'll tell you the effects of climate change, but they won't tell you anything else about their argument. This is very much the same thing that happened with the ozone layer. And just like the ozone layer, when the planet starts, like I was saying before, when the planet corrects itself, it corrects its course, or, you know, does what it's going to do naturally, they're going to take credit for it. And they'll have to replace it with another scheme. But you argue with some of these people. I mean, I do it all the time. I argue with them and I bring up lots of different arguments. Today, obviously there's a bunch of things that I'm leaving out of this video because, again, it's a huge subject and I tend to ramble quite a bit with it because you get lost on a topic within the topic. But, you know, I argue with these people all the time. I debate them all the time in text. It's very frustrating because it's very much like debating some sort of religion. In fact, I call environmentalism a religion because a lot of the science that they use to defend their point of view isn't very credible, and the only reason that they have a very, very strong hold is because it's popular belief. That's why. Popular belief. You know, the left managed to make climate change popular belief, and if you say anything against it, then you're an idiot and you're a skeptic who has, you know, no education, whatever, doesn't know what he's talking about. Yet they'll invite scientists who have nothing to do with climate change, who have nothing to do with climate studies, to support their theory. They always love to bring up the 97% consensus thing. You know, you really can't have a consensus in science. That's not how science works. You can't have a popular opinion that's just voted on and then all of a sudden that's the accepted norm. You know, they tried to do that with Einstein and his theory of relativity. They had 100 scientists say that this isn't how it works, and, well, that theory's still being pondered to this day. Some say they already proved that he was right. So, yeah, consensus is bullshit. Consensus in science, it's basically the corruption of science. You know, nothing is sacred in science. But in environmentalism, all these things are basically sacred. My generation won't hear these arguments. Like I was saying, I've had these conversations with people before, and I bring up these points, and, you know, all they can ever say is, well, what about the warmer temperatures here? Or what about, you know, 97% consensus? Always back to that consensus. Always. Well, scientists believe it. All scientists believe it. No, they don't. The consensus was based on 77 people. That's hardly all of science. Well, those are the majority of people, and Bill and I, the science guy, says, well, Bill and I, the science guy, is not a climate scientist. So if my opinion doesn't mean anything to you because I'm not a climate scientist, his should mean nothing to you as well because he's not a climate scientist. So there's a lot of problems with the left's logic on this topic. This is what I mean when I say I can ramble on and on about it. I mean, because as I'm thinking, I'm remembering more and more stupid arguments that I've had over the past with people, and it just keeps on, you know, resurfacing new information that, or old information just keeps resurfacing. So I apologize if I'm ranting quite a bit here. But basically the way I see it is the only reason this is being pushed is for control. And also for there are some money incentives too. I mean, you have different environmental groups out there that have been formed to stop climate change. And obviously if climate change goes away, their group's not going to get money. So they're going to do whatever they can to keep this scam around. The same thing goes for the universities that have these departments that study climate change. You know, if there wasn't any kind of climate change, then they're not going to have anything to study. You know, if there wasn't a problem, they wouldn't worry about it. There wouldn't be any reason to fund these programs. So all these scientists, like the IPCC and all these scientists at the universities that say that there's climate change, you know, there's a big incentive to say that. So when you talk about people being paid off to say that climate change doesn't exist, how about let's look at the people that are being paid to say that it does exist? You know, money and science don't mix. They shouldn't mix. They should never be mixed together because it destroys the credibility of a scientific argument or debate. As soon as you have a money incentive to prove something to be true, then there's an incentive to lie. There's an incentive to fudge results. There's an incentive to cook the books, to make a record day, hot day, more than what it is, like what they're trying to do now. All sorts of corruption within climate science. And like I said, I can go on forever about it, but I'm going to stop the video right here because I think you guys are starting to get the point. And I think we'll return to this subject again because I know it's going to come up, and a lot of these things I've said to you are going to come out a second time. I'll probably say them again because I kind of muddied this one up a little bit, but you know, that's my argument. That's my argument for climate change right now. That's at least the beginning of my argument. So, thanks for listening, guys. If you like the show, thumbs it up. You know, spread the message out there, and subscribe to the channel. Give me suggestions in the comments below, and if you think you can do a better job, please get out there and do it. You can follow me on Twitter at M.O.T.O.R_show 1776. Thanks for taking the ride with me again, and until next time, take it easy.